And you became squatters in this house.
Yes.
Paid no rent in November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. Paid no rent.
The dispute between Kamari and Mark and Jorge was typical of this chaotic period. The former tenants believed they still had the right to stay, while the new buyer believed he was being taken advantage of. When the two sides brought their claim to court, a small case for $5,000, but one that reflected a larger social context. The hearing took place in late 2014 inches Los Angeles County, set against the backdrop of California's historic foreclosure wave that lasted from 2008 to 2013. Hundreds of thousands of homes changed hands, many families were displaced, and an inevitable consequence: an explosion of squatters, illegal occupants trying to prolong their stay by invoking oral tenancy, lack of paperwork, or because there was no official eviction order yet. When the hearing began, Judge Judy observed all three individuals from the moment they entered the courtroom. Kamari walked quickly, her eyes straight ahead, full of frustration. Mark was calm but tense, tightly gripping an envelope containing documents. And Jorge, the characteristic expression of someone who believes, "I am legally right because I have the title."
You have the audacity to sue him for your stuff. When you stood here and just said to me, we started to move out in mid-July. He comes back August 10th, and according to you, he finds your dog there.
Judy read them like a familiar book, something she had done for over 30 years. Kamari opened by accusing Jorge of disposing of their property after he bought the house, including keeping their dog, Milo. When she said this, Judy did not react immediately. She simply squinted slightly, a common reflex. When a plaintiff makes a strong, highly emotional claim, Judy checks whether it is fact or an emotional outburst. Mark added that they had lived in the house before the foreclosure process was completed and had been allowed to continue renting. But immediately, Judy asked a question that sharply cut to the legal foundation of the testimony. Who allowed you to rent? The previous owner? And was the foreclosure completed at that time? This question had a dual purpose. One, determining whether they were legal tenants or merely holdover occupants. Two, directly addressing the common loophole in post-foreclosure disputes. Oral tenancy is invalid when ownership transfers to a new buyer. When Mark replied, "We were allowed to stay by the previous owner," Judy immediately adjusted her tone. But when the house is foreclosed upon and the new buyer receives the title, the previous owner's permission is no longer valid. "You knew that, didn't you?" Her expression at this moment was slightly downturned, her voice lowered by half a tone, a soft questioning technique, before launching sharp, knife-like questions.
Being the smart person I am, I assume that at that point you stopped paying rent.
Yes.
Right. So you paid no rent to anybody.
Correct.
What Judy intended to confirm. Legally, Kamari and Mark were no longer legitimate tenants after Jorge bought the house. Pushed into a weaker position, Kamari shifted to accusing Jorge of keeping their belongings, discarding their property, and that the locks were changed. This was the point Judy paid most attention to, not because she immediately believed it, but because she knew many squatters often used the narrative of illegal eviction to try to legitimize their occupancy. Judy asked, "Do you still have the keys?" Mark admitted they did not. And this was the moment Judy looked at Jorge. "Did you change the locks?" Jorge replied, "I changed the locks because they didn't pay rent for 3 months." A seemingly firm answer, but to Judy, it was a major contradiction. When a tenant doesn't pay rent, the landlord must follow the eviction process. You cannot change the locks. Judy said this slowly, her eyes fixed on Jorge. Her movement at that moment was a slight tilt of the head to the right, a sign that she was preparing to attack the weak point. Jorge argued back, but they weren't real tenants, they were squatting. Judy immediately counterattacked. If they weren't tenants, then you cannot demand rent. If they were illegal occupants, you must call the sheriff. You cannot change the locks yourself. A legal maneuver that pushed Jorge into a corner. He wanted to say they were not tenants, so he had the right to evict them, but he also wanted to say they were tenants to compel them to pay rent. Judy immediately recognized the inconsistent patching in his logic. Jorge continued his defense by accusing them of never paying. Cameri immediately presented Venmo documents, a tactic using documentary proof. But strangely, the Venmo amount did not match the amount he stated. Judy scrutinized this detail. She asked, "Is this for rent or a private loan?" Mark replied, "Rent." Jorge interjected, "No, that was just money they borrowed from me." This was the moment Judy raised her voice for the first time in the hearing. "So, are you a landlord or are you a personal lender?" This question served to dismantle the entire logic of Jorge's testimony. He could not simultaneously be a landlord, to demand money, and a lender to deny the tenancy relationship. In psychological analysis, this is typical behavior of someone who knows they are in a weak position, changing roles at will, to rationalize previous actions. Turning to the story of the dog Milo, Judy looked directly at Cameri.
Do you have proof that he is keeping the dog?
The question was not because she doubted the emotion, but because she understood that in a civil dispute, personal property must have evidence of damage or retention. Cameri presented a neighbor's testimony, but no pictures. Judy noted it, but did not focus on it, as California law does not allow emotional compensation for unproven property. But what Judy truly wanted was psychological. When asking Jorge about Milo, she observed the delay in his response. Jorge answered after nearly a second, a sign of hesitation, and Judy immediately took note. However, legally, she could not order the dog returned without evidence. Therefore, she returned to the main issue, the claim for $5,000 in damages. And this was the part Judy dissected like a surgeon. She asked Mark, "If you weren't paying rent, where do you get the standing to demand compensation?" Mark replied that their belongings were held illegally. Legally, this was a reasonable answer. Even if occupying illegally, personal property must still be protected. But Judy pressed on. "What did the sheriff tell you when the foreclosure was complete?" Both were silent for a moment, a revealing instant. They knew they no longer had the right to stay, but were trying to cling on. This is the typical psychology noted in the Parker and Woods analysis, a phenomenon in forensic psychology describing people who know they are legally wrong but attempt to reverse the victim position by creating a new narrative. Conversely, Jorge exhibited the Rodriguez psychology, the frustration of the new homeowner encountering occupants, coupled with the legal strength of holding the title. But frustration does not equal power. Judy cut in, "You don't take the law into your own hands." This was the most important statement of the hearing because it laid the foundation for the entire ruling. Judy sharply synthesized the legal factors. 1. Oral tenancy after foreclosure is invalid. 2. Occupying after foreclosure is illegal. 3. Despite the illegal occupancy, the personal property of the occupants still cannot be arbitrarily disposed of by the new owner. 4. The $5,000 amount was unreasonable due to a lack of physical evidence of damage. 5. Jorge's act of changing the locks was procedural misconduct, but it did not create liability for compensation if the property loss was unproven. Judy's final ruling was the conclusion of pure logic. Plaintiffs failed to provide sufficient evidence of property damage.
You want how much? $5,000 for stuff that you allegedly left there after you moved out.
The claim for $5,000 is dismissed. Her voice lowered, her expression serious, without any leniency. To Jorge, she emphasized, "You have the title, you are right about ownership, but your actions were wrong." This is the part Judy always stressed, clearly distinguishing between legally correct and procedurally correct behavior. Regular viewers also understand something deeper. Judy doesn't just judge a case by the law, she judges the motive. And the motive of Cameri Mark appears very clearly in her eyes. They stayed without paying rent for months, then came back to sue for $5,000 when their benefits were cut off. This is exactly the type of case Judy is especially strict about because it touches the core principle she always defends. You cannot turn wrongdoing into a privilege.
Bye.
Rental agreement.
Goodbye. You can sucker somebody else. You squatted for 10 months in a house where you know you
So
had no
was the
business
person that
squatting.
he
You
was
moved out
sleeping
in
with.
July. Goodbye.
He didn't throw away the other people.
That's why when Judy says goodbye and stands up in action, anyone who's watched the show long enough recognizes it isn't just frustration, but a clear sign that she has fully read the motives behind the case. She doesn't need more arguments. She doesn't need more explanations. She only needs one closing line carrying both legal and moral weight: claim dismissed. The hearing concluded with a legal snapshot of the 2014 to 2015 era when foreclosure, squatters, oral tenancy, and ownership intersected in a tangled web of short circuits. This $5,000 case reflected a larger truth. The law does not always side with who holds the title, nor does it side with who tells the most emotional story. It stands in the middle in the cold realm of evidence, conduct, and responsibility.